Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is a book coach and the author of the Hemlock Inn Mysteries series. Her name is Josee Smith, and here's my interview with Josee. Josee Smith, welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
My name is Josee. I am a indie author. I'm a book coach. I'm a mom. I work in HR. I do a lot of different things. And I love writing and authors and storytelling. And I'm always looking for ways to help people lean into their writer side and embrace their writer side and work past any blockers or hurdles, in their writing. So I'm excited to chat a little bit about that.
As an author, you've written a 6-book series titled The Hemlock Inn Mysteries. That's the name of the entire series.
Mm-hmm.
Without spoiling too much of the series, what is each book in the series called, and what is the series as a whole about?
Yeah, so I don't know if I can give you every title. That's you're calling me out there. There's 6 of them. It's hard to do. The series starts with Auctions and Alibis. That's the first book in the series. And it's about a main character named Simone who gets fired from her bartending job because she punches a customer who's being rude. That happens in the first 2 pages, so it's not a spoiler. She gets fired and she's about to get evicted and she's stressing out, and then she inherits an inn left to her by an aunt who has passed away. And so she goes to this cozy little town in Washington State to take over the inn. And within, the first day of showing up at this inn, she stumbles onto a dead body and has to solve the murder because she's trying to figure out what to do with the inn, and needs to figure out who murdered this person and what's kind of happening with the mystery there. And then maybe a spoiler, maybe not, but by the end she decides to stay at the inn, and so each successive book is about a new murder at the inn and her growing into her new role as the owner of an inn. She makes friends with people in town. There's a beagle that she loves named Lola. She has 2 senior citizen sidekicks who always want to get into the mystery and figure out, who's doing all these things in town. And it's just kind of a cozy, sweet little, stories that kind of follow Simone around as she learns about this town and becomes an amateur sleuth, basically.
What drew you to writing mystery novels?
I've always really loved mystery. Ever since I was a little girl, I feel like I read Nancy Drew a lot as a kid, and just kind of consumed mystery a lot growing up. So I've been a writer since I was a little kid, and so I've always written mysteries, attempted to write mysteries. I like things aren't quite what they seem. People have secrets that we have to figure out. I don't write very dark mysteries. All of my mysteries they're about murder, but they are lighthearted. And I like kind of creating an environment where, you would want to go visit this inn and have a cup of tea and sit in an armchair while Lola the beagle is, asleep at your feet. But also there's this puzzle that we have to unravel, that we have to, kind of figure out. So I've always just really loved the genre. And as I kind of thought about the books that I would want to write myself, what I would want to put out in the world, mystery was just kind of my automatic, I think this is what I want to do. And yeah, it's just always something that I've really enjoyed.
You mentioned that you're an independent author, and I find it interesting there are box sets. I think it's a couple of box sets of your series available. How did you get those made available as an independent author?
Yeah, so it's actually honestly pretty simple to do as an independent author. I use a formatting software called Vellum. Vellum is the paper. It's called Vellum, and that's what I use to format all of the books to get them up to go on Amazon. So every time I publish one, I put it through Vellum, and it turns it into an ebook that can then be sold through Amazon. And for the box set, Vellum makes it super easy. I'm able to just the two box sets are the first three books and then the second three books in the six-book series, so it's split in two. And I just combined the three documents into one vellum document and then exported it to be uploaded onto Amazon. It's actually very straightforward and simple. I work with a cover designer to get the covers made, and so I also had them make me a cover for the box set so I could have that as well. And then yeah, just get it up on Amazon in the same way that I upload all of my books. Some people like to read in like sets of three. They like kind of consuming, longer books and different stories. So I wanted to have something available to different readers if they like to read that way versus reading like the individual books themselves. But Vellum makes it really easy. There are other Atticus is so I should say Vellum is Mac only. Atticus is another formatting software that you can use on PC or Macs, and you can also do box sets that way. So that's another option if you don't have a Mac. But it's a relatively simple process. I think it took less than an hour total for me to get it all kind of compiled and ready to go up on Amazon. It's very, very straightforward.
Now, you're a book coach, and what is a book coach, and why did you decide to become one?
Yeah, so a book coach works with a writer typically from the beginning stages of their writing process. They've just kind of started to think of a story idea and they're looking for some additional support as they're writing the novel. Writing novels, it's a really long process and it can be a very, lonely process. We're often just sitting by ourselves in front of our computer, writing. And so a book coach comes in to offer some support early on, encouragement. Book coaches also give feedback as you're writing. So that's kind of the difference between a book coach and an editor. An editor typically comes in after you have finished writing your novel, and then they'll, give you feedback on what's working and what could use some improvement. Whereas a book coach will be there with you along the way. They'll give you feedback as you're writing and just kind of helping you make sure that you're staying on track with the story that you want to tell. As a book coach, I'll help you figure out like what is that story that you want to tell and how do you get it out onto the page in a way that you feel good about. And in terms of, why this is something that I was interested in, once I really started taking my writing seriously and decided to, put my books out into the world, I got so much joy out of it. It was the fulfillment of a childhood dream. It was something that I was so passionate about that I then wanted to help other people do the same thing, and really help to like cultivate the sense of writer inside of someone. I think writers, like all artists, but writers, we can be kind of sensitive. It can be hard to take feedback about things that aren't working. And I really want to encourage people who are interested in writing. I want to like encourage them to actually make it to the end of their novels and finish them and put them out into the world if they want to. So it kind of just naturally followed from, me being a writer myself and then being like, oh, this was an amazing experience for me. Now I want to go and help other people also, have this experience. And just, yeah, trying to help more people get their books out into the world in a way that they feel good about.
Many authors have a job outside of their work as an author and or have a family to take care of. How can one balance their work as an author with family and or employment outside of the writing world?
Yeah, it's definitely very tough. That's my current experience. I have a job in HR, as I said. I also have an 8-month-old son, and I have a husband. I have a dog and a cat. Just like all these things going on. I think for me, what's really helped is like, you know, embracing the identity of being a writer. I think was a really big shifting point for me in terms of being able to show up for my writing on a regular basis. Because once I started really owning the identity of writer, it became like a non-negotiable that I will be writing. I don't write all of the time. I'm not able to write every single day, but I always know that I will have something that I am writing and I will always be, kind of striving towards putting my words out into the world. So once I got to a place of just, embracing that identity, I feel like that helped a lot with, thinking about my priorities. It's like, yes, I prioritize my job, I prioritize my family, but also I prioritize my writing and I figure out how can I fit the writing in around all of the other things that I have going on. On kind of a like tactical level, I'm a big fan of setting like small goals for ourselves. So rather than saying that, I'm going to write for 2 hours every day this week. Honestly, right now my goal is 30 minutes a day is what I try to hit. And there are some days of the week, like a couple days ago, I just didn't really want to sit down and write for 30 minutes. So I said, okay, I'm just going to write for 10 minutes. And I wrote for 10 minutes. I got, some words written and I moved on with my day. So having those kind of small, goals that I'm trying to hit on a daily basis, it all ends up adding up. Like, the time is going to pass regardless of whether or not I'm writing. And if I can hit, kind of small, do a little bit of writing every single day, by the end of a month, 6 months, a year, I will have something to show for it. So I find that it helps to, yeah, have those small goals that I'm working towards. And I would say also, in terms of like, how best to balance all of this, I think treating myself with like self-compassion and acknowledging the fact that I am trying to do a lot of things and it's okay to not do everything perfectly, but what matters is like, do I feel good about how I'm doing all of it? So I think for writers trying to figure out how do I balance everything, knowing that like it's okay that everything isn't going to go perfectly every single time, but what matters is showing up and trying to do your best and being okay with what ends up happening.
What advice do you have for authors who don't think anyone will read what they write?
Yeah, it's such a good question because it's probably like the number one like fear I hear from new writers as they're getting started, the like number one thing that kind of keeps them from writing. It's something that I dealt with personally. When I started writing Auctions and Alibis and tried to get serious about my writing, I worried like, is anyone going to want to read this? Is it any good? And I think what I say to those fears, to those authors is I genuinely believe that if you love what you're writing, if you're really passionate about it, you'll be able to find a reader out there who will also love it. There are so many readers in so many different places who read all kinds of things, and there's someone out there who's also going to love what you have decided to write. That has been like an amazing discovery in me publishing my books and putting them out into the world, is just the number of readers who come to me and say how much they love, the story that I just made up in my head. So I think I try to remind myself about that all the time, that if I love it, someone else will love it. And I try to tell new writers that there's other people will enjoy what you are sharing if you infuse it with your enthusiasm and your excitement about the story as well.
Now, I'm going to try to avoid using the word jealousy with this question, but how can authors deal with a sense of inferiority and insecurity seeing their fellow authors doing more and succeeding?
Yeah. I think of it as like comparisonitis. That's how I think of this issue. And I think it's important to understand that like we don't know what's going on in someone else's life fully. Often, particularly with social media, we tend to see like a highlight reel of what's going on. So people will, post when they get a publishing deal or when they wrote 10,000 words in a day, or, all of these really like positive moments. People don't always share the harder moments. Sometimes they will, but often it tends to be these highlight reels that we see out on the internet. And so I think just acknowledging that, like knowing that you're only seeing some of the story, I think is really important when you find yourself starting to compare yourself to other writers. I think as well, for me personally, when I feel myself kind of getting into that comparison game or starting to question what I'm doing because I see someone else doing something different or doing something better, I take breaks from social media or from, kind of the spaces where I feel like I'm doing too much of that comparison. And I tend to, when I take those breaks, I tend to go back to what I love about the writing that I do, and that my love of writing starts with my love of reading. So when I feel like I'm comparing myself too much to others, I'll go and read a book and just like fall, in love with that book and fall into the story. And just remind myself of like, this is why I do this, for the sake of storytelling, because I want to, share my stories with the world as well. But it's definitely tough. And I think just taking breaks and figuring out like, how can you refill your well so that you don't feel like you're doing as much comparison to other people?
Why can perfectionism, and I'm talking about my probably my biggest weakness as a writer, Why can perfectionism be such a hindrance to an author's success, or even a hindrance to an author's ability to write?
Yeah, it's a big one, definitely. I think where it comes from is as writers, we are often big readers, and so we'll read a lot of books and we'll love the books that we read. We'll get so excited about them. We'll say, okay, I'm going to go write something myself. And then you try to write that first draft, and it is not good at all because first drafts are not meant to be good. Like that's not what the point of them is. But you end up comparing your first draft to a finished novel, and there's just no way that your first draft, is gonna compare. So that's when that perfectionism can come up because you're like, oh, well, I can tell that this isn't good because I have very good taste in books, and I can tell that this isn't good. And I don't know how to get it to the place of, being better, or you don't think that there's any way that it can be improved, and made better. So I think perfectionism stems from us all being really big readers and comparing our writing to these finished drafts or these finished books, not realizing that those books had multiple drafts before they got to that point. Revision is like a really important part of the writing process, that we don't always see if we're just starting out as a writer. And so I think it's important to remember that like what you put out on the page, the first time you sit down to write is not going to be the final form. You will have the ability to improve it, to make it better, and to get it, to a better place, and to get it to a place where people are going to love it. But I think we have really high expectations for ourselves as writers, and we really, want to make something that is perfect as soon as we set out to do it. But it's yeah, I mean, you wouldn't expect like a painter to paint something, Sistine Chapel, as soon as they sat down to paint, right? So, but we have these like higher expectations for writers as writers. I think it's important to remember that it's a practice that will take time to develop, but you can get better at it. You can, edit your story and get it to a place where other people will want to read it and will want to fall in love with it. You just can't let that perfectionism stop you from actually making progress.
How can one, this is my final question, how can one build a writing practice that can be sustained for the rest of the author's life?
Yeah, so I think embracing the identity of yourself as a writer is a really big one because once you call yourself a writer, even if you have a job, even if you're doing other things, once you see yourself as a writer, I believe that you will then like be able to keep writing for the rest of your life because you're like, oh, I'm a writer. Of course, I'm going to write in the same way that like I'm a reader. Of course, I'm going to keep reading for the rest of my life. So I think that identity change can really help with kind of keeping this up for the rest of your life. I would also say setting those small goals. So rather than saying like, hey, I'm going to write a book in a month and it's going to be published and be a bestseller on Amazon, instead thinking I'm going to commit to, showing up every day for 10 minutes a day, half an hour a day, write 500 words a day, just these small goals that sometimes you'll write more, maybe you'll write a little bit less, but if you can maintain it, kind of on a consistent basis, I think that's also something that will help you, sustain your writing for a very long time. And then the third thing that I think is really important is just continuously tapping into your personal motivation and your reasons for why you are writing. So understanding, what is motivating you, and like deep down, like why did you decide to write in the first place? I think always returning back to that can be really helpful. Once you reach a point as a writer where you're sharing your writing with the world, and this is something that I've experienced, once you're putting it out in the world, it's really easy to let other voices kind of come into your head about like what you should be writing or the genre that you should be writing, or all of these different things, like where the comparison can kind of come out as well. And so and that can be like a, big deterrence from actually making progress on your novels because you're hearing all these other voices and it can be hard to stay motivated. And so if you instead work on tapping into your personal motivation, your why for writing, that'll help you stay committed to it for the long term because you're no longer writing for someone else outside of you, but you're writing because it's something that brings you joy and makes you really excited to be able to do on a regular basis. So I'd say those three things, I personally found to be really helpful in keeping up with writing routine, even as my life has changed and, things have changed around me. And it's what I would really encourage other people to keep in mind as they're trying to build a writing practice that they can sustain for a long time.
Josee, thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus. You were an amazing guest.
Thank you so much. This was great. I'm really glad we got a chance to talk.
Josee provided some very insightful writing advice during the interview, and I greatly thank her for that. Before I sign off for the final episode this month, I have a major announcement to make. After the final episode of this season is uploaded next month, I will be shutting down the Apollo Papyrus newsletter on Substack. There will be a full explanation as to why the Apollo Papyrus newsletter is being shut down on the newsletter in the next few days, but I am launching a new Substack newsletter in July that will replace both the Apollo Papyrus newsletter and another Substack newsletter that I write. For those of you who listen to this podcast and/or watch the Apollo Papyrus YouTube videos, the podcast and the YouTube channel are going nowhere, and there will be a lot of content forthcoming on both the podcast and the channel throughout the rest of this year and beyond. Apollo Papyrus will remain my outlet for writing and literature-related content in audio and video format. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@ApolloPapyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.